Good morning.
Good morning.
Today is a day of joy, and I'm glad all of you can celebrate it with us today. That music, I don't know each song, especially that last song, just imagining being in the presence of God and walking through the gardens together with God. You know, if you could imagine how Adam and Eve must have felt when they got to walk through the gardens with God, and to know that God is within us, to know God's presence. There's so much joy, right? So many times we separate ourselves from that and we're looking for meaning, for purpose, for joy. But God is right here with us all the time. We just need to open our eyes. And these songs this morning really opened my eyes to it. And I just felt so much joy. And it was just beautiful. Looking back at Levi, he brings me a lot of joy. He was dancing when the song started. You know, there's so many things to be joyful about, to bring a smile to our hearts, to bring a smile to God. But we need to have our eyes open to that joy, to keep our hearts set on what brings us joy. And this last week, actually, there's a lot of fun things. I don't know if you saw, there was a huge culture concert that we watched last night, some of us. It was a lot of fun being the kids. We danced in our living room. We thought of going to a concert somewhere else down in, I think in Cottage Hill Park. They're having a concert, but we jammed out in our own room. We're actually getting ready. Tomorrow we're going to go to this filming for this new movie coming out, and they're having like a little fake concert from the 90s for Jeremy Camp, this movie coming out, and they needed a bunch of extras to fill the room, and so we were looking through pictures of what the 90s wore. And I think that inspired me today. I'm wearing looser pants than I've worn in 20 years. And actually, I really enjoy it. I'm like, wow, the 90s had it right. Not wearing these tight pants. Tight pants are not as fun as these. Lena was like, they're a little baggy, but I'm trying to connect with my earlier roots. But it's really, it's exciting, a lot of fun things. I love being in the presence of other people and hearing music. And I feel like God's Spirit is written through the lyrics and through people singing together. You know, hearing everyone's voices together is a lot of joy, right? Joy for us and joy for God. So I asked Lena earlier this week what joy means to her. And so finally, late last night, she wrote me something. She didn't tell me, but she wrote it. So I wanted to read it to you. Joy is a spark, an emotion that surges through your body, inside and out. You feel it in your heart and soul, and you show it with your smile. Joy brings life. When you're filled with joy, you dance around happily in this journey of life and naturally want to share the divine spark with others. Joy is the result of achievements, something you've worked hard for and finally completed. Joy is beauty. When someone you love does something that makes you smile. When I think about it, most of my joy comes from give and take with others. We say God created this world for the purpose of joy. And I think that's beautiful. I think we're meant to bring joy to everyone around us. Through loving God, loving others, and loving the world, we naturally weave a thread of joy all around us. Joy is the result of true love in action. Joy is continuous and ever-growing. My joy grows with me as I grow and experience new elements of this beautiful life. Experiences I never knew were possible bring me a new kind of joy. Joy is a child's smile when they learn something new. Joy is your happy dance. Joy is a big hug and a wet, gushy kiss from Grandma. Joy is reaching milestones. Joy is the impossible. Joy is creating with your talents. Joy is soaking in a memory. Joy is a great reason to be alive. We should appreciate the simple joys of life more often. And then she finally said, thank you for reminding me of joy. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves to experience the joy that is life, right? It's all around us. God designed this world to be beautiful. God gave you wonderful people in your lives. But so many times we're so busy that we don't recognize the beauty that is right in front of our eyes. That which God gave to us and lives within inside of each one of us. So today I wanted to share a little bit more about joy. Joy is this funny thing. It's not just an experience, but it's something that drives us in our lives. And it's something that should be ever present. It's hard to think about that because sometimes life isn't easy. But joy isn't dependent on our circumstances or people, but it's rooted more in who we are, knowing and accepting why we are and how we are. Joy is understanding we're God's divine children, we're God's expression here on earth. And our potential is therefore limitless. It's boundless. That love and joy can be expressed in every day, every part of our life. So joy is this great big thing. You know, when I was a kid, it might be hard to believe, but I always had a smile on my face, and it was stuck there. And I always was smiling, so much so that kids in my classes would often offer me money to not smile. They'd look at the clock and say, we got 5 minutes left of class. I've got $10 here. Don't smile. And I would try, and it would last about 10 seconds. And then a smile would come back on my face. And I don't know where it came from. It was always there. I don't know if it was the people around me or something that I was thinking about, but this smile was always a part of my characteristic. It was why people call me often Jario, because I'm cheery all the time. And it rhymes with Jario, and it's easier to say. But cheeriness and joyfulness was always part of my life when I was younger, and I hope so still today. It's a trademark that I had, and I sometimes wondered where it came from. And then I was thinking the other day, you know, they say ignorance is bliss. So maybe I was just not very smart. And so I was just smiling all the time. I was that happy fool, enjoying every moment of life. But as I think about it more, I think this joy is much deeper than some kind of superficial smile. It was something that came from within. It came from within me knowing that I was loved. Right? Knowing that I was loved, not just because my brothers, you know, punched me and showed their love for me. We always said in my family, if you weren't getting picked on, then somebody didn't like you. It was a sign of affection to get a Charlie horse when you're watching TV. But, you know, joy, right, is something that's rooted in knowing that you're loved, knowing that you're valued. And it wasn't just in my family, and although my parents showed it all the time, my grandparents, my cousins, we enjoyed each other's presence. But I think more and more that I also recognize from an early age how much God loves each one of us. God lives within each one of us, and if God lives within each one of us, then we are special and unique and beautiful beings. Each one of us is so amazing. We sometimes look at ourselves in the mirror and we don't see what God sees. We don't see this image that we are amazingly crafted, that we are in the image of God. But when you take that into your heart and really recognize who we're made in the likeness of and what that means for our day-to-day life, I mean, you almost can't help but be joyful, right? You can't help to be happy. To think about what this world could be if we spread that joy, that cheer, that generosity, that kindness to one another, and we allow other people to start seeing themselves as God's unique embodiments of truth, as God's expressions on this world, as people can start lighting up to that fact. I mean, we can imagine this world transforming before our eyes, our families transforming, our relationships changing. Joy isn't just an experience we're having right now, but a hope of what God is doing in our lives and what God will create when we allow God to be present, when we imagine ourselves walking in the garden with God, when we recognize that when two or more are gathered in His name, God's presence is here. Right? This is where joy comes from. And so, throughout the years, you know, I always had this optimistic, positive outlook on life. And I don't think it was a fake idea. You know, sometimes people will look down, optimism, oh, you know, they're just living in la la land or a fairy tale. But when we really understand who God is and what God is doing in this world, what God is capable of doing, and what God is capable of doing through our own lives, you realize having that positive, optimistic outlook is just a natural outcome. Right? That we should be looking at this world and saying, hey, God can do great things. God can overcome my present circumstance. And even though I might be afflicted right now, I may be struggling right now, I may be going through a problem right now, God is going to bring me through it. And this is where our optimism is rooted. This is where that joy is rooted. So, to be honest, though, there were years, right, where I allowed other things to cloud my vision, to separate me from that joy. And I realized really it was just this block between the joy, because the joy was ever present. It was just hidden behind circumstances or things that I allowed to take precedence in my life. There were times when I couldn't find that smile, when it was buried somewhere, and it was hard for me to figure out what direction I should take in my life. Why things were happening to me, why things weren't going the way that I thought they ought to go. There were challenging times. But the more I look at it, the more I realize that I allowed finite things that were going to end, things that were temporal, to get in between something that was infinite. Things that couldn't be stopped. God's love and God's energy does not have an ending. It does not stop somewhere, but I was putting my eyes and my heart on things that were short-lived. And because those things weren't working out in the time frame I thought they should work out in, I got challenged and I stopped smiling. I stopped having that optimism. But really, when we realize that our joy, our happiness isn't something that is just an experience, but it's the core of who we are, it is rooted in our understanding of God and the direction that our life ultimately is going. Our joy is rooted in knowing our value and understanding why God made each one of us and how important each one of us is to our brothers and sisters. Here in this room, each one of you has a value that you might not recognize, but your brother and sister does. Someone else in this room says, wow, what would this world be without you? What would my day be without seeing this person? You know, each one of us has this intrinsic value, this value that's unsurpassable, this value that everybody else needs in this world, and we might not recognize it, but you better believe God recognizes it, and a lot of the people around you here today, they recognize the value that you possess. And in that we can find our joy. So that joy is always there, and it's not because of us, but because of God, because God planted that into existence, into the fabric of life. In Galatians, right, we're talking about the fruit of the Spirit. We're talking about the results of knowing God, of being in connection with God, of knowing God within our hearts. Right? When we allow God to be present in our lives, these fruits emerge. And last week we talked about love. This week we're talking about joy. This is one of the fruits, one of the expected results of a faithful life. Now, sometimes we don't think about joy in this really pious way. It's kind of this superficial thing sometimes we see that, oh, joy is something kids have, or I've got serious work to do. Joy isn't part of my life, right? Sometimes we're too grown up or too mature to have joy. We have too many important things to do to be joyful. Sometimes in our faith, right, we're looking at faith and we see joy as this silly thing, but we want our faith to be strong, right? We want our faith to be sacrificial, to be indemnity paying, sin fighting, this kind of conflict, I'm going to fight the world kind of faith.
Nope.
We don't want it, but sometimes we imagine that's what faith is. That faith has to be these tear-soaked prayers, that faith has to be sorrowful or painful. But God never intended our faith to be such a way. God never intended our faith to be destructive or painful. God expected that when we have a relationship with God, that we'd be filled with joy, that we'd be excited for life, that we would be optimistic about our future circumstances, that we would face the challenges of this world with a smile on our face. This is what God hoped for. Actually, joy should be at the forefront of our hearts and minds. And according to Wikipedia, because that's my standard now, that's where I get all wisdom from, the joy referred to here is deeper than mere happiness. It is rooted in God and comes from Him. Since it comes from God, it is more serene and stable than worldly happiness, which is merely emotional and lasts only for a short time. So this joy is rooted in God. It's rooted in something eternal, something that's unchanging. This joy is the reason we continue to move forward. This joy is that optimism, that hope that things are going to work out, that things will be transformed if we keep moving forward, loving and giving of ourselves. So in the divine principle, it talks about joy. It starts out talking about joy, that this is the purpose of creation, that this is the root of everything. Right? This should be at the forefront of our mind. How can I smile today? How can I make someone else smile? How can I bring joy to the heart of another person? This should be the trademark of our faith. We as unificationists are joyful, and we bring joy to this world, and we bring harmony and happiness. And our relationships should be marked with that. It says, even at the cost of their lives, people seek for the joy that can enrapture the original mind. And how beautifully that's written. I feel like this enraptures, like it's going to gather our mind and our heart, and it's going to lift it up to a higher plane, to a higher ground, to a higher level. That's the joy that we're seeking for, and we give our lives for a moment of that joy, that bliss, that happiness. This is the human condition. We grope along exhausting paths to cast off the shadow of death and search for the light of life. You know, the human condition has not been filled with joy, though. We've been distracted by many different things, right? Distracted from the purposes and the hopes that God had for each one of our lives. And so we haven't been able to seek out life. We haven't been thriving and living our life, but merely surviving and fighting off the shadows, the doubts, the bills, the unwanted, the mundane things that kind of overcome our lives, that overcome our senses. But we're here to search for that light of life. And how do we find joy? People feel joy when their desires are fulfilled, right? When our desires are fulfilled, that joy bubbles up from within us. We recognize it again. We see it again. The purpose of our lives can therefore be said to be joyful, right? The purpose of our lives. We get kind of overwhelmed sometimes with theological and dogmatic ideas. But really the essence, right, is to have joy. To bring joy into our relationships. To bring joy to other people. To make our neighborhoods more joyful, more happy. Helping people find out their desires and fulfill them. In Tenrikyo, which is really cool, they're always talking about joy. That's like the root of their faith. I created you human beings because I desired to see you lead a joyous life. So God, the creator of everything, the creator of every law, every principle, every concept, created us so that He could see us live a joyous life. He wanted to see us happy. He wanted us not laying down our sacrifices, our offerings, our burdens, but to come up and say, hey, I love this life. I love my family. I love these other people in my life. I've overcome the negative, all the shadows of death, and I've come into this reawakening that life is about joy, life is about happiness. So this comes about when our desires are fulfilled, right? Joy comes about when our desires are fulfilled. And here's the kicker with that, is that what we set our desires on, what we set our hearts upon, determines our joy. So if we set our desires, our hearts, on something short-lived, right? On this next job, on paying this bill, on building this relationship, something that's temporary, then our joy is only temporary, right? We can determine what we set our desires on. What is it that's going to bring me joy? Now, if we root ourselves in something greater, in something that's everlasting, then doesn't it figure that our joy can also be everlasting? My desire is for my Heavenly Parent. My desire is for my family, for my children, who will go on into generations beyond me. Right? My joy is rooted in something longer, in something eternal, in something that doesn't end. Well, then my joy, even despite my ups and downs in life, despite my circumstances, can be eternal as well. What we root our desires and what we set our hearts on is going to determine about how lasting and how impressive our joy is in our life. When our desire is on something larger than ourselves, on something larger than what we can control, then our joy is also larger than what we could even create on our own. But there is a difference between happy and joy. I was looking at all these different things, trying to figure out what's the difference between joy and happiness, because everybody was saying there's joy, there's happiness. And I thought, aren't they the same thing? But this is according to a lifestyle mentor, Rachel Fernley. Joy and happiness are wonderful things to experience, but they are very different. Joy is more consistent and cultivated internally, right? It's something inside of us. Joy is something that we decide inside of our hearts. It comes when you make peace with who you are, why you are, and how you are. Whereas happiness tends to be externally triggered and is based on other people, things, places, thoughts, and events. I just go to this next music concert, right? If I just go to this movie, then I'll be happy. If I get this clothes, then I'll be happy. If I get some kind of external thing, I'll be happy. And that's great and wonderful. We should have a lot of moments of happiness. I love to be happy as well. But joy is not dependent on anything external. It's something within ourselves. It's an acceptance of who we are, that God created me this way. You know, I might not be as rich or as famous, or I might not have the athletic abilities of someone else, but I'm happy with how God made me, and I understand the value of what God made within me. That I'm uniquely crafted for a special reason in this universe. God made me, and so therefore I'm joyful. God made my wife. God made my kids. I don't always understand them, but I'm joyful because I know God made them for a special reason. God made them for something special and beautiful. Now I see joy does pervade it, in my family. Last night, so Kyler had a little meltdown. The Lego wasn't working right. It happens sometimes. And he was trying to make it do something that it didn't do. And he got really mad. And then jumped up and he took our coffee table and he pushed it across the room. So I took him upstairs and I sat with Kyler and we sat and we shared some stories and we talked and I just tried to really understand him. I just took a lot of time to hold him and I didn't know what kind of caused that uproar, but something triggered in him and then he had his little meltdown, which we all can expect from kids sometimes. Even adults have them every once in a while. So he had his little blow up, but we just sat with him and we comforted him and I tried to let him know he was loved and cared for and we just want to get to the bottom of this and help him resolve his tensions. And later on, Lena started sweeping under that coffee table because it was moved. And she said, well, I'm going to make do. It's moved anyway, so I'll clean up under it. And Kyler saw that. And so when we were laying in bed last night, Kyler said, I'm really happy that I helped Mom clean up the house today. In his outburst, he found joy. But I think it's because it's in him, right? And even though life goes up and down, even though things frustrate us and get in our way, right? When we set our hearts on joy, even a difficult circumstance can be made into a happy thing. Can be made into something that brings us joy. So that was just his little thing last night. But I realized with me, as I got older, I started accepting different goalposts for my joy. Right? I started setting different things that were going to bring me happiness and joy, about buying my own house, that I had in Palatine. I loved it. Right? I set my heart on that, and I set my heart on my cars and my business that we owned, and these things, right? They were the source of my joy. And I set my mind on different things, on different goalposts. You know, if I get this going, if I bring this result, you know, then I'll be happy, then I'll be joyful. But life happened, and some of those things aren't with me anymore, right? And it was difficult, you know, as we were letting go of certain things that brought us so much joy that we thought were going to be the rest of our life. But we realized that God used these circumstances, these experiences, to prepare us for the future of our life. Right? That it wasn't about that temporary thing. God wanted us to have those temporary things, but it wasn't so that we had those things. It was the experiences that we would learn from. And those become the heart of our joy. That becomes the root of our joy. You know, when I was building my faith, when I was on STF traveling around Europe, I found so much joy just thinking about this kingdom we're building, about families we're going to spread love to. Right? And I used to think STF was so hard. Being a missionary was so hard and challenging. You know, going out and talking with people and sharing and getting rejected. I thought, wow, this is so difficult and challenging. But it was actually a really joyful time, and I realized shortly after, when I started going to school and paying my bills, that I would trade anything to have that life where I didn't have to worry about bills or tests or paperwork. You know, it was just easy, right? And it was easy to be joyful. But then I started getting overwhelmed with bills and tests and paperwork. That took over my attention, right? Just a couple years before, all I could think about was, I'm going to build this kingdom of heaven, how we're going to build these happy families, how I'm going to build a good relationship with my future wife, right? And then I got overwhelmed and clutter in my life that distracted me from that which would bring me true joy, right? And I started getting covered, and these things were real, right? These bills and tests. And they were immediate. And they demanded my attention, but they got in the way of what really mattered in life. And so I had challenges and difficulty, and that smile didn't come as easily to my face. Because I was focused on things that didn't really matter in the long run. Yes, they're important, but they didn't have the lasting value. And they captured my mind and they covered my heart. They became the focus of my everyday life. Instead of this great dream that I had, it became, how am I going to pay next month's bill? But recently, I started looking again at the purpose of our church. I've been really looking at this and trying to understand it. We're excited. We're having a community meeting next week, and we're talking about how we're moving forward and how we're solving problems. But through that all and through the challenges, I started looking at really what's the core of our faith? What's the core of my belief? What is it that moves me forward? And I realized all these things that have taken the forefront of my focus, events and finances and church buildings and programming, you know, all these different things that are external, right? I've taken my mind off of what is important in my life. What's important? What is it that we're trying to achieve through all these different things? If all these things were gone, what would really matter? And that's what I've been really trying to get to recently. What is it that's important? What is the core of our faith? And we are really striving here to build God's kingdom based on happy, healthy families. Right? Our vision statement for our church here is to have these expanding families of God, bringing joy to people rooted in true love. Right? It's expanding God's family. It's expressing how to make healthy families to other people. And when you imagine that, when you imagine the end outcome, right, of a family that used to struggle, used to bicker, used to fight, maybe was at the brink of divorce, and now they're sitting at a dinner table, smiling and sharing life. You know, if you can think, that's the goal, that's the outcome. And not just for our families, but so many other families that need hope, that need joy to pervade their life, to take over all the challenges that they've let get in the way
of the people that matter in their lives, of the relationships that matter with God and with other people. Right? That's the heart of our church, is to help other people understand how to make these healthy, happy relationships. This is the core, and this is where my heart yearns to be. And since I started putting this more in my heart, focusing what is the outcome? Okay, if we teach this concept at church, if we talk about this after at a gathering, what is the outcome? Right? When I started thinking about what does that kingdom of heaven look like, new life has been coursing in my mind and my body, and I've been excited again. Not overwhelmed, not over encumbered, but joyful and lightweight, because I'm envisioning what God has for our families. And so when we come back to the core of our faith, what brought us here? It's joy. Right? What brings us together? It's the hope for joy. When I come to church, I want to see brothers and sisters because I expect to feel joy. Right? That's the root. That's the cause of all these things. Now I realize I still don't have all the answers, but I know that God will lead us to where we need to be. That as we continue to seek God's kingdom, as we continue to put God first, all the challenges, all the difficulties that we have can be overcome. And we can get to where God needs us to be. In Psalm 16:11 it says, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is the fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." And God lets us know the purpose of our life. Joy is understanding the purpose and vision of our life. And being grounded in that and having that hope because we understand the value and the purpose of our life. And in that understanding of the path of life is a presence and the fullness of joy. So that's really exciting to me to think about this joy that's going to be coming over. Joy is really a hope rooted in God. It's not based on our circumstances, but on a conviction that God will make things right, that God will bring us through, that God will help us overcome what we need to overcome in life. God is guiding this world, and we just need to trust and be present in our everyday experiences. Jesus told his disciples, he said, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice." Or no, this wasn't Jesus. This is Paul. "Let your greatness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God." That we should always rejoice. Rejoice always. And it's kind of hard to imagine that, right? Because I know you've been through difficult situations. You've had challenges in your life, and you think, how can I rejoice right now? We rejoice with this hope of what God is doing in our lives and what God is doing in this world. And as we persevere, as we continue to move forward, that joy will be evident to other people, that people will be overcome and overwhelmed by our joy and want to be a part of that. So when we look at our lives, we have to think, how do we cultivate this joy? Well, one is we need to quiet our minds and our hearts. Time of meditation is important for cultivating joy. Too often our mind tries to tell us what we need to do, what we need to accomplish in order to be happy. But if joy is rooted within us, if God resides within our hearts, as we quiet ourselves, as we take time to just sit and be present in our circumstances, present in our surroundings, then joy starts to come out of us. And we start recognizing that joy. Also, we need to share with one another. Again, this is like last week. The love is also requiring to share, to have give and take. Joy is not something that's found just by ourselves, but it's in relationship with God and relationship with others. As we experience give and take, as we share with one another, joy comes about in our life. And then we need to pray for the things to come. God, guide me. God, I want to trust in you. God, as your kingdom is here on earth as it is in heaven. You know, when we have that vision, when we start thinking about what God is doing in the long run, joy can be present in our lives. Joy is not because of what's happening to you today, but because of the overall picture of what God is doing in our lives. And then Reverend Moon said, why did God create all things? You say for joy, and that is correct. But whose joy are we talking about? Joy must belong to someone, right? Joy belongs in relationship. The purpose of creation is God's joy, of course, but in order to ensure and fulfill God's joy, mankind in all things need to achieve abundant joy. Right? It's not just about making God happy, but it's our experiences with one another. There are all kinds of joy. Joy in which God can take delight. Joy in which mankind can take delight. And joy in which all things can take delight. Joy is created by the action of give and take between subject and object, producing harmony and fellowship. When we're engaging with one another, when we're sharing the gifts of life with our brothers and sisters, harmony and fellowship come about and joy is present. So we need to continue to pursue this. This is the core of our pursuit in life. So make excuses to find joyful moments. Make excuses to go walk through the park. Right? Make an excuse to go spend time and have coffee with a friend. Because ultimately that is the purpose of life. Right? And all too often we're too busy to take moments to enjoy life, to smell the flowers around us, to see spring in full bloom. We're too busy to experience the joy that we ought to be living. So you have to give yourself permission sometimes to say, this bill can wait, cleaning my house can wait today, because I'm going to spend some time with my kids tonight. Jesus said to his disciples, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. And if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. What were Jesus' commandments? Right? They were love God and love others. Love your neighbor as yourself. Forgive 7 times 70. These are his commands, right? All of them are rooted in relationship and moving past our challenges, the things that are of this world that would get in the way of joy and happiness. They're about loving God and loving others, of bringing harmony in this world. This is the command that will keep you in the presence of God. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Right? So here again, this joy is being used in this different way. It's not just happiness. It's not just an experience. It's something that Jesus can actually give, right? And we can say joy being complete. So it's this desire, it's this hope of all humanity to see harmony and joy and happiness in their everyday life. Finally, I wanted to leave you with this. There is no limit to joy. Happiness has no end. When you are standing in the love of God, every cell in your body jumps for joy. I love that. You breathe in and out with the entire universe. That's that presence. That's being present in the moment. In this state, your life is fulfilled. This is how God means us to live, intoxicated in love and joy. And through our joy, God receives his joy. The joy of man is the joy of God, and the joy of God is the joy of man. So brothers and sisters, go and live a joyful life. It is not selfishness, but this is the way that you bring joy to God. This is the answer to what my religious life is all about. This is what my devotions are all about. I should be devoted to joy. I should be devoted to bringing joy to my brothers and sisters, to my kids, to my spouse, to my parents. If you want to offer something to God, if you want to make a life offering, if you want to show how devoted you are, make it a point to be joyful. To not be fixed on all these circumstantial things, all the worries of the world, but be fixated on joy and bringing joy in every relationship. So brothers and sisters, here's to a joyful week for all of you. Make this your religious practice this week. As Nani said, we come to worship here on Sunday, but hopefully we can do it throughout the week. So how you can worship throughout the week is bring a smile to someone's face this week. Bring a smile to someone you love, someone you don't love, someone you don't even know. And in that way, you are worshiping God in the most beautiful and precious way. Let's join in prayer. Our beloved Heavenly Parent, we are delighted to be in your presence this morning to experience your joy. God, it's great to be reminded about what the real purpose of life is. God, that all of our wants and all of our desires, they're really rooted in this desire to have joy, desire to have happiness, God. God, let us let down the things that are temporary, the things that have been getting in the way of us and you, that have been getting in the way of us and our partners, and between us and our kids. God, these expectations we have of them, these unrighteous values that we have for them, but God, let us just delight in who they are and find joy in our everyday life, God. We want to bring this joy to you. We want to bring this joy to our families, God, and I just pray that you can be with each one of us today. God, that you can encourage us to find that joy in our life, that we can really pursue it in all things, God. And we know that many of our brothers and sisters, even here, are going through a challenging time right now. God, they're facing illnesses, they're facing financial difficulties. God, they're going through struggles of their faith or relationship problems with their family. God, I pray that you can encourage them to set their eyes on you and what you have in store for them, God, to see the long story that is being written through their lives, God, that we can encourage one another. God, that we can be here for our brothers and sisters. God, we can find joy and comfort in knowing that there are people that love us deeply right here in this room. So God, we want to lift up this time to you. We want to lift up our brothers and sisters to you, that you can walk in our lives and be present every day. God, we thank you and we want to offer this day to you. I pray this in all of our names, in your name. Amen and amen.